All right, hello everyone. I'm excited to give this talk today on organizing tables and preparing your data for analysis. I just wanted to start um, with some information from this data usage study. This was done about 3 years ago, and basically what this study found is that 68% of enterprise data went unused in 2020. And the total amount grows at 42% annually. So if you take a look at this graph here, what I did is I normalized the amount of data to 1 for total data. And then we've got our 68% here for unused data. And if this rate has continued to 2023, we're at about right here, which means that the amount of unused data is now about twice as much as the total amount of data that we had in 2020. So there's a ton of unused data. And the big question here is, why are we not using it? And over the years and through my experience, I've kind of gotten an idea of some of those things. And I wanted to share some of those with you. So barriers to entry for perhaps not using data. The first one is the people who own the data in warehousing and storing. They're great at that. Some of you might be on the call as well, data managers. Um, Most of them don't know the domain that you're working in, and some of you might, which is absolutely great, but a lot of them don't. The second one is the people who know the domain, which is most of you, scientists and engineers. Accessing and processing the data is really difficult just because of how it's set up. There's a little bit of a divide, right, in how you can access it sometimes. The other part is if you do know how to access and process the data, patience is really, really difficult with things like this because 80% of solving a problem using analytics is accessing and preparing the data. So it's very, very easy to get unmotivated, especially if you have to learn to code as well. So data scientists and programmers, they're normally kind of the ones doing that data manipulation, but because that's kind of their area of expertise, they're not necessarily doing that in real time with your expertise. So sometimes things have to go back and forth. So the point of JMP and doing data manipulation in JMP and Workflow Builder, as I'm going to show, is to kind of wrap that all into one thing so that you as a scientist or engineer can kind of do all of that and kind of close that feedback loop within yourself. So the data that I'm going to look at today for manipulating and showing a workflow is CDC flu data. I picked this because it's towards the beginning of flu season. I thought it'd be relevant. I'm going to explain a little bit how this data is set up, and then we're going to look at the data itself and what we might need to do to manipulate it to get an answer that we're looking for. So there's three different parts of the data on the CDC website right here at this source. So there's clinical lab positives. So those are flu positives that are done in the clinical lab. Then you've got public health lab positives. And then you have influenza-like illness. So that's not necessarily positives, but maybe something that seems like the flu. So this data was taken in different ways. Clinical labs and public health lab positives were combined until 2015. But now they're available weekly. The clinical labs are available weekly since 2015, but the public health labs went monthly since 2015. But the influenza-like illnesses, they are still at weekly data. So you might have a situation where you want to combine the influenza-like illnesses with the clinical lab positives, since those are relatable time periods of data. So we'll look at how to do that in the second example. For my first example, this is a screenshot from one of the sections of this website here. And what it has is these different levels of influenza-like illness activity throughout the US by state for weeks that end in a certain date. So this particular one is September 9th. That's a few weeks ago. And there's a slider at the top that I didn't include where you can kind of slide between the weeks, and you can kind of see the difference, but you can't see it all at once. So I was thinking, is there a good way to be able to visualize this from week to week without having to toggle between everything? So luckily, there's this download data button here. And when you click that, you can select all for everything and download all the data that's there. So that's what I did for this first example. And what I want to find is, how do historical flu activity levels compare between the states? And we can look at all of that at once and not necessarily have to toggle between weeks. So the result of that, I wanted to look kind of like this. You can see that we have years over time here. These are all weeks. I know it's a little jumbled down here. You can, of course, kind of pick what's shown, but I just decided to keep everything. And what we have are these levels over here showing the heat map of when things get worse over time. So you can see over here, remember, this is influenza-like illnesses. So over in 2019 and 2020, we have a pretty good increase of red. And that's because we have flu and COVID going on. And that would make sense, right? So there's also a filter over here by season. We also have the states nested with regions. So this is kind of what I was thinking when I started. It was just kind of the idea that I had, and then I created it in JMP. So the next thing I want to talk about is data preparation tips, and that kind of segues into this first point here. You always want to have an end goal first. You want to have a problem to solve, an analysis tool or something. And the reason for that is you don't want to be going down one path and then maybe have to backtrack and then go towards another, because it's not turning out kind of the way that you may have expected, or maybe you don't really have an end goal in mind, and you're just kind of branching out and doing a bit too much work. So definitely have kind of an end goal first. The next thing is, be prepared to modify your workflow. You want to make sure that you can insert steps, things that you might not expect that you might need to do. Just be prepared to do that. Next thing is, don't worry about exact JMP jargon. You can learn how to do things along the way, each step, and there's great resources for that. Search JMP, the JMP community, JMP technical support, and then each account and each company has a dedicated JMP support team as well. Mine is the Gulf Coast region, and all of those are great resources. The last one is, check each step to make sure you're getting your desired result. This is pretty important, and you'll see a good example of that visually on a graph here in a second. It's easy to assume that everything turned out the way you expected, but you might have missed something. It happens all the time to me. And then again, be prepared to modify your workflow as a result. All right, so we're going to take a look at JMP now. I want to show you where this is stored first. I've got a folder right here. You'll actually be getting a zip of these files here. This is the presentation that I was just on. This is the downloaded version of the chart that I showed you. And then there's some additional information in here from another portion of the flu website that we'll be getting into in the second example. But I want to show you what this one looks like first. So I'll show it to you before I import it into JMP. We have a state. We've got a URL and a website that we're probably not all that interested in right now. But then there's the activity level, and then kind of a grouped version of the activity level that we won't be using, and then that end week and the week as well with the season of the particular level. So we're going to import this first. So if I go to JMP, I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to go back to this folder here. And because I know it's in a really good format, I don't need to do anything with the import. I'm just going to say data use preferences here. And now I've got this open and jump. And the first thing I want to do is just graph what I have. Let's just look at it, see what I might need to do. So I had this in mind, right? I had the states on the left and then kind of the date on the bottom. So let's just kind of start messing around with this. So I've got state name here. Let's do weekend down here at the bottom, and it kind of translates to years. Default here is box plots, but let's go to the heat map right there. And then I also need my activity levels here. You can see this turned out with a default color scheme. I'm going to go in here and change this via the legend settings. And I'm going to click on the color theme. And I'm going to change this to a chromatic scale. And you can see how this would turn out from green to red. All right, so we've got this right now. This isn't quite looking the way I want it to. You know, I want this by week and by year. And you can see that these variables here, weekend and week, are in continuous. So if I want to do this by week, I mean, I can put this here, but you know, we're not splitting this up in ones like I want it to. This continuous variable here actually needs to be in ordinal format so that we can split this up a little better. So I'm going to right click here. Whoops, not nominal. I want it to go to ordinal. Actually, it brings it back to this, but if I want this by year too, you know, flu season starts about like, maybe right here. So I want it to start over here and then end at the very end of flu season. So I need a year variable down here. There's no year variable in the data table, but I can create one. And I'm going to do that from the weekend column. So you can see on weekend in my data table, I'd be able to extract the year from it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I can right click on weekend. I can go to date time, and then I can click year. And within Graph Builder, I now have a variable that has the year. I could change that to ordinal myself as well. And then I can put this down here. So I'm going to start with the year, and then I'm going to go back with the week. All right, so we're pretty close. I'm going to add a local data filter so that we can have the season. And now I can start looking at this on a season level. I can also change the font size on here with axis settings so that we can see everything. All right. So I can start kind of toggling through this, and I see a couple things along the way, and we'll get to another one here in a second. So this one's pretty obvious right here. We've got our years, and then we've got our weeks, but this week 53 over here is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. You would think that it should be over here somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what's going on here. And I didn't expect this. So this is one of those steps that I'm probably going to have to add something to. I'm going to select one of these just so I can see it in my data table. I'm going to right click and go to rows so I can look at my row editor and see if there's something going on with this data. So the week is week 53 here, but the weekend is 2015. So what I did when I did the year is I took the year of 2015, but it's actually 2016 or sorry 2014 that this should be a part of. It's week 53 of 2014. So I need a way to kind of reorganize this data so that it's in the right order. And my idea is to take the weekend date And there's a really quick way to do year and week from that weekend date so that we have a constant way of looking at the date in the year. This week was generated from the CDC data, so it may have been kind of in a different format. So I just want something to be consistent with that weekend date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my data table. I'm going to click on weekend, right click on it, and I'm going to create another column. And under date time, there's something for year and week. So I'm going to click that. And now I have a week and a year that are based on this weekend date. So if I use that, I'm going to go back to my control panel. And then I'm going to use my year and week. I can change that to ordinal as well. I'm going to put this down here. And if I click done, now I should be able to cycle through these and everything's in the right order. So I have work week 53 over here now, and everything is the way that I would like it to be. Another thing you might notice is these states are in reverse alphabetical order. So there's a value ordering feature that you can access either from this axis, which I believe is new within the past couple of versions or so, or you can go to it from the state name variable here in the column property. But I'm going to do it the new way because it's much easier. I'm going to right click on the axis, then you can click edit value order. So from there, we have this custom order, or this order that's put together. In Graph Builder, it just kind of reverses it. So I'm going to hit reverse here and then apply and OK. And now it's flipped my ordering of the states here. All right, so there's one more thing to do to this particular graph. I wanted to add the regions to the states. And I'm going to go back to this particular Excel file so I can show you what the groupings look like. So this was found from another area of the CDC website. These are census divisions. And if we wanted to group the regions by the census division, we could go in and use recode to group something like Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas together to west, south, central, and then everything else to its corresponding census division. And you might want to do that in order to see if there's any relationships between nearby states or something like that. So I'm going to go to the data table, and we're going to use recode to do this. So I'm going to click on state name. I'm going to go to columns and recode. And I'm going to select my states that I want to recode. So I'm going to go to Arkansas, Louisiana. I'm hitting control while I'm doing this so that I select all of them. So Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and the other one was Oklahoma. Now I can right click on any one of these and say group to new value. So I'm going to group to new value. I believe it was west, south, central. I'm going to click OK. And now down here, we have these states would be recoded to west, south, central in a new column called state name 2, but I'm going to change that to region. So if I clicked recode right now, it would just recode this section. I obviously have more to go, but I'm not going to show that right now because that would take a long time. So I have a script that I'm going to run that basically does this after the fact, but initially you would have to recode all of these and then click recode to get your next column. So just assume I clicked recode and that it works, but I'm actually going to run this script instead. There we go. So now I've got my region column with everything coded that way. Whoops. So now I can go back here. I'm going to deselect everything since Some stuff got selected. I'm going to go back to my control panel, and now I can use the region column and nest it with my states. And it looks like it reset the font size, so I can go change that again if I'd like. You can do it for both. It's tabbed right there. So I can click OK. And then OK here. And there we go. So that is our first graph. And I can toggle between the different years. I can also hit Control and look at the whole thing if I'd like. And I'm kind of interested in what's going on here in 2019 and 2020 because that's when COVID started. So I'm going to go there. And something that I saw was that there was a lot of red here very, very late in 2019 and early 2020. But we know that COVID didn't really start being a huge thing that people were thinking about until around here, maybe the second to third month of 2020. So, there's a couple of things. Is it the start of a flu season and the flu season was pretty bad? Or are we actually seeing maybe some signs of COVID happening before before it was actually being talked about a whole lot? So I'm kind of interested, is there a way to be able to see that? So that's going to be our next example. I'm going to close out of all of these. I want to show you what it would look like in the PowerPoint. Oops. All right. So this chart here, this is kind of what I had in mind. Is there an area where we can tell that the ratio of flu-like illness over the clinical lab flu positives is actually getting bigger because the influenza-like illnesses can be associated with COVID as well, but the clinical lab flu positives are just part of the flu. So once this gets bigger, you know that something else is happening rather than clinical lab flu positives. So I want to be able to detect that somehow. And this type of chart would do something like that. So this is what I want to make next. So when did flu-like symptoms that were actually COVID start is what I'm kind of trying to look at here. So for this example, I'm going to look at these two Excel files, and actually they come from here. So the flu view phase 2 data. I'm going to talk about what these are, and they were downloaded from another section of the CDC website. This ILI net, that is our influenza-like illnesses data. This is our clinical labs data, so clinical lab positives. And then this is the data from clinical labs and public health that's from before 2015 and 16. So that's kind of a little bit of an anomaly here. And then we have our public health labs information, which was only monthly. So if you remember, I mentioned that ILI-Net and the clinical labs, these two things, those were on a weekly basis. So I'd be able to do some data analysis here on these two since everything is split out by week. So I've got these two open. We can kind of take a look at what's going on. This is the influenza-like illnesses. What we're really going to be looking at the most is region, year, and week, and then the number of influenza-like illnesses in this column here. I'm not really interested in anything going on here right now. This is really all we're going to be looking at. On the other one, the clinical labs, I have similar information here, region, year, and week, so that's really important. We can match those together from the other file. And then I've got, this is total specimens, so that's the number of flu tests, and then the total positives are right here, and they're split between two different flu strains. So I might need to add those together. So we'll look at doing that too. These I really don't care about, the percent positives or anything like that. That's not necessarily pertinent to our particular problem. So we know that our columns of interest are these right here from this file, and then these here from this file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to JMP, and I'm going to import those two files. So we're going to go to flu phase data here. And if you remember from here, the header is actually in the second row. So I can't necessarily let JMP import that, given that this is going to be the column header. So I need to make a change, and I'll show you how that works. So I'm going to use the data preview this time. And you can see that JMP is going to import with the first row here, or the columns here, when the columns are actually here. So I'm going to change the column names to be on row 2. You can see it shifts. You can scroll across to see the rest of everything. Then I'm going to click next, and it's just asking me if I want to change the column names. And right now I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to click import. So now we have our influenza-like illness report here, and we're going to do the exact same thing for the other one. So I'm just going to click open. Then we're going to do clinical labs, same thing, use the preview, and I'll change the same thing here. We'll go to next and import. All right, so we've got both of these. And something I noticed right away is a lot of our columns that are normally numeric, they are in a categorical format. And the reason for that is you see all these X's. So we need to do something to make sure that they're in a numeric format, especially this column over here that is the influenza-like illnesses. It has an X right here. And we need to create a ratio. So we can't do that with a categorical variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of these columns, and I'm actually just going to clear here so we can highlight them all. I'm going to highlight all of these, and I'm going to do an operation called standardize attributes. So I'm going to right click on the columns, and then we have standardize attributes. So we're going to change all of these at once. We can then go to attributes, and I'm going to select all just so I can change any of the data types and modeling types. We want this to be numeric and continuous. So I'm going to hit apply and OK. And now all of those X's have been replaced with missing data. And all of our columns have been changed to numeric and continuous columns. So this was going on here on this table. It's also going on over here. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. And this will help us add these two together. So I'm going to right click, standardize attributes, select all, and then numeric and continuous. And I'll hit apply. And then OK. So now that we have numeric data, we can add these two together. So I'm going to use the shortcut again. I'm going to right click, new formula column, combine, and then we can add those sums together. So I'll click sum, and now I have a total of A and B together. And I can rename that as total positives. And I'll click apply. All right, so we now have our total positives. We also have our total influenza-like illnesses over here. So now we need to get our data together by joining the region, year, and week for each of these tables. And then we need to get the total positives and the total influenza-like illnesses on the same data table. So we can do that with an operation called join. So if you look at the number of total rows for each of these tables, we've got 22,000 over here and about 36,000 over here. That means that there's probably some data over here that we don't have over here. So I just want to use what we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this table my main table so that we can get the data that we have for ILI, for influenza-like illnesses over here, and not be missing anything. So I'm going to use this as my main table, and we're going to go to tables and join. And from there, you can join this table that we just selected with any other table you have open. So I'm going to select my ILI net. And then we have all of the columns. Let me pull this up a little. All of the columns from both tables. In order to match columns, I am going to control click my region, year, and week. And then I'll click my region, year, and week over here as well. And then I can click match. And from there, if I have this auto refresh turn on over here, you'll start to see what kind of table we're making. This is a new feature in JMP 17. It's really, really helpful when doing table manipulations. You can see there's a whole bunch of columns right now. Look at all those. We need to get rid of some of those because really all we need are our influenza-like illnesses and our total clinical lab positives. So I'm going to start doing that by combining these two columns here. I'm going to select region, year, and week from this table. And then I'm also going to select my total positives. And I can put these in my output columns. I'm going to drag them here. And you can see my table preview just updated. And now I can drag my influenza-like illness total over here. And now we have this information in the same table. We're doing an inner join right now, which means that we're taking the information that's common between the two data tables. That's what I want right now. There's different versions of joins that I'm not going to go into at this time, but this will work for the analysis that we're doing. And I'm going to call this ILI and clinical positives. Now I can click OK. And since we have the information here, I can close out of these data tables. I do not need them anymore. And now we need a ratio. So the ratio we were looking at was ILI total over total positives. So once again, I can use that shortcut here. Many operations are available through the shortcut. There's even more in the formula editor, but a lot of the more common ones are here, as you can see today. So I'm going to use new formula column, and I'm going to go to combine again. And there's ratio and ratio reverse order. So ratio would take total positives over the ILI total. I want to do the ILI total over the total positives. So that's why I'm going to select ratio reverse order. And now I have a column that has that ratio. And I can go to Graph Builder and start to do year first. It makes the nesting easier. I'm going to do year, week, and I'm also going to do the ratio. And I'm going to do this with a line chart. Oh, I have year and week combined. I need it nested. Oh, and my year and my week are not in ordinal format. So that's why it was combining them together. So once again, here's another step that I have to add. So I'm going to change my year to ordinal. I'm going to change my week to ordinal. And now we should get this to work. There we go. So now we have a line chart showing where this increase is happening. If I wanted to, I could change this to smoother. And I know it looks weird right now, but there under method, there's a moving average selection. Since this is time series, I want to look at it that way. So I'm actually going to increase this here. And now we can kind of see the time series that's going on. We've got an increase here in about the third month of 2020. So the ratio here of ILI total over total positives is actually increasing right here, which is about where we expected it to be. And I could add data points if I wanted, and then right click here and make them transparent. Doesn't give us a whole lot of information this way, but you can also do it this way if you'd like. All right, so we created our second chart. We've answered our second question. So my first example, if I had taken Workflow Builder, if I had gone File, New, Workflow, and hit record before I did any of this information, I would be able to record all of the steps that I just did. And then I can organize them the way that I have it over here. You can actually group these steps together by highlighting and right-clicking and saying group selected. So that's what I did here. I created a data access section, and I created a data blending and cleanup section, and then a basic data analysis section. And those actually correspond to the different modules on the workflow, the analytic workflow that Gail showed at the very, very beginning of the presentation. So this is the way I like to do it when I'm making a workflow in these different modules and different sections here. So you can see the import text file. So that was our first Excel file. Then we've got some of the year week things that we did, the changes that we made. We've got the recode here at the end with the regions that we created. And then we have our basic data analysis with the graph builder graph that we made. So as long as I have everything else closed here, I'm going to run this workflow. And it's going to do everything that we did before, and the table opened on my other screen. But now we have the exact same analysis that we had before that we manually created. So from this, we can also update our data in the Excel file and run it again, and we'd get the new data added on. So say we downloaded some information from the CDC website that's more recent, and we overwrote those files. We would get new information per week if we ran the workflow again. So that's a really, really cool thing. I'm also going to show the second example as a workflow. So if we do that, we have our import text file for both of these. And then we have data blending and cleanup. We have our standardized column attributes that we did. We have our total positives that we made from our A and B addition, the joined tables. We even closed tables. And then we have new formulas and the modeling type change. And then we have the graph that we created at the end. So if I run this, we'll get that very, very last graph that we were looking at. So again, this would update over time as the Excel file is updated. This method, using the data table manipulations and the workflow builder in conjunction, it results in quick, efficient decision-making. So what you created, it didn't take hours to code, and also weeks and months learning to code, because that's a big deal too. It also didn't sit in a systems or programmer queue waiting to be implemented. You were able to do it yourself. It all came from you. The analysis came from you, the domain expert. And any modifications that need to be made, you can do it since you're the one who understands the process. And now your analysis is also standardized, it's done correctly, and it's repeatable through automation using Workflow Builder.